Is there a fighter pilot on board? The captain's voice cut through the cabin like a gunshot, and I remember thinking, for a second, that someone had lost their mind, until the co-pilot's voice cracked over the PA. Captain Mitchell is unconscious. I need immediate assistance from anyone with combat aviation experience. That was the moment the whole plane changed from annoyed to terrified. Turbulence slammed us side to side. Rain stitched the windows. Babies screamed, and people started typing goodbye messages like they were already halfway to hell. I was in 23C, half asleep until those words. Keisha Washington opened her eyes like someone had switched on a light inside her head. She looked ordinary. Jeans, a plain blouse, hair in a no-fuss ponytail, the kind of plain you forget. Next to her, some guy in imported glasses fussed and scoffed, clearly convinced that the people who could save everyone lived in first class. He stood up and barked about his brother-in-law, who once flew a private plane. The laughable part was you could feel the math of the whole cabin doing the same sum. Rich equals right. Professional equals first class. Keisha didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She stood, walked forward with that calm, practiced motion of someone who's been through chaos before, and told the flight attendant, Colonel Keisha Washington, U.S. Air Force, F-22 experience, rescue missions, navigation under extreme conditions. I felt the room pull in a collective breath. Richard Blackwood, that's the glasses guy, snorted, clearly waiting for a punchline. He muttered, "She must have read a Wikipedia page." But you could see his mouth go slack when she began to speak the language only pilots and doctors usually know by heart. She rattled off procedures, pressurization loss, emergency descent profiles, communication codes, not like someone reciting a script, but like somebody pulling from real, lived memory. The co-pilot, James, who'd sounded like he might cry over the intercom, stared like a man who'd found a lighthouse in fog. In 15 seconds, the skeptic chorus quieted. Keisha had that kind of calm that doesn't beg for respect. It simply exists and makes you follow. Richard tried to drag the drama back to himself. "I demand credentials," he barked. "We paid for first class." That line landed like a slap, especially when some woman in first class whispered, "But she's so young," as if age and skin could measure skill. Keisha stood there, hands unclenched, and you could see the history in her face, not bitterness so much as the steady burn of someone used to proving themselves again and again. She didn't point fingers, she didn't shout, she simply asked, "James? Altitude? Airspeed? Weather?" And when she got the numbers, she started planning. I'm not going to pretend it felt safe. For a while, it felt like we were all holding our breath for a second plane to drop out of the sky. Captain Mitchell was convulsing. Foam at his mouth, monitors screaming in the cockpit like alarms in a horror film. James was frozen, hands hovering over the yoke, and Keisha, Colonel Washington, became the kind of person you only ever read about in headlines. Precise, quick, and quietly unshakable. She checked the captain, administered first aid like she'd done it 1,000 times in worse places, and told James exactly what to monitor every 30 seconds. She moved with a surgeon's economy, one motion following another with no waste. Then she did something fearless and maddening all at once. Instead of trying to fly around the storm, she plotted a controlled spiral descent through the eye. James protested. That's against every safety protocol. She smiled the kind of smile the desert and combat taught her. Rules are there to save lives until they don't. In 2018, we flew a rescue in Afghanistan. Missiles hit us, 2 engines out, navigation ruined. The manual said don't try. We landed 17 wounded soldiers anyway. The story wasn't a brag. It was a quiet explanation for why she would do the impossible now. Richard stormed into the cockpit, the entitlement sweating out of him. "You're putting us all at risk," he yelled. For a beat, the whole plane looked like a courtroom. Then Dr. Patricia Chun, a chief neurosurgeon from Johns Hopkins, sitting in first class, stood up and walked forward. She didn't argue. She simply said, "Colonel Washington, I worked in military hospitals with pilots. I'll monitor the captain." Recognition passed between the two professionals like a handshake. That's when the narrative shifted. This wasn't some amateur power play. This was expertise being recognized by other experts. And the rich man's confidence started to sound thinner and thinner. Keisha radioed a military frequency out of habit, and to everyone's shock, the reply came back, "Colonel Washington? Spectre?" Commander Rodriguez confirmed her identity. The guy who'd sneered at her suddenly looked like a mirror reflecting his own mistake. The Pentagon, the Air Force bases, they were all awake now, clearing airspace, prepping an emergency landing. For the first time, Richard Blackwood's arrogant posture dissolved into something like humility, an ugly, surprised humility. What followed was tense, brilliant, and terrifying. Keisha guided that giant 747 through physics most people never consider. She turned military techniques, spirals, and microadjustments, and three-dimensional weather reading into a ballet that kept steel, fuel, and human lives together. James became her hands as much as he was her assistant. Dr. Chun jabbed needles and monitored vitals. The plane, battered and groaning, responded. At one point she said something that made even the hard-boiled travelers whisper. Sometimes the manual will get you killed. Knowing the rules enough to break them safely is what saves lives. We landed, not with a quiet sigh, but like survivors who've cheated fate. Tired, shaken, alive. People held on to each other, hugged strangers, cried, and for some seconds the cabin was a single organism letting out a long, exhausted laugh. Richard Blackwood's face was a study of shame and astonishment. He hadn't just misjudged Keisha. He'd been spectacularly wrong about who deserves trust and who doesn't. Later, after ambulances and military debriefs and 1,000 questions, a truth settled over the passengers. You can't measure courage or competence by clothes, skin, or seat number. Keisha walked away without spectacle, the woman in the plain jeans who had just saved 312 lives. She didn't gloat. She didn't humiliate the man who needed it. She simply did what she had always done. Stepped into danger, fixed what she could, and left everyone else to figure out what their own small opinions had cost them. If you like this story, the kind that makes you squirm a little at your own snap judgments, hit subscribe. I'll keep bringing you stories of ordinary people doing the extraordinary, and maybe next time, we'll hear about someone else you'd never expect to be a hero. Thanks for listening, and stay humble out there.